On October the 22nd, 2012, Governor Romney and President Obama had a debate. The debate was on foreign policy and dealing also with the Middle East. Hi, I'm Barry J. Thornton, and I've had a lot of experience with these issues, and I just want to give you some sort of insight into further things. Whilst the debate is important, I'd also like to fill in some missing details that never appears in these sort of debates. Maybe time constraint or whatever, but I just want to go into some of these things that come from specialist organizations that are on the ground there and are advising us of what's going on. And that's why I want to do this, because quite frankly I'm sick of really hearing only half the truth, or probably a lot less than that. An overview. Our leaders today seem to be ashamed of our power, and they can't seem to be sort of using it very apologetic. And that's both Obama and Romney in this particular debate. And that is quite worrying, because it's clear that things are really going wrong, and yet they're wanting to ring fence it and almost pretend it's not there, and I don't know, somehow hope it's going to come right. It just is, it's not going to happen that easily. Then of course we've got this Iraq weapons of mass destruction, which was alluded to. Saddam Hussein clearly had weapons of mass destruction. They found the evidence, they found the buildings they were in, but they're empty. So what happened to all these weapons of mass destruction? Well, apparently the Russians were aware of the intention of the British and Russian and Americans to attack with their allies, so they warned Saddam. He, not wanting to be caught with it, red-handed, sent it across the border, which is right next to him, into Syria, where they buried it. That's where it was. Now, Syria, of course, has never been known to have a big chemical and biological weapons production facility or research facility. Saddam did. So that's where all these weapons have come from, which now they've got, of course, they've taken these weapons out the ground and they're being put onto rockets in containers, etc. And so now we have a very potent force there. King Jordan, the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, mentioned this. Not only mentioned it, he screamed it from the rooftops that they just caught a whole lot of insurgents, Palestinian insurgents, once again Palestinians, with these chemical weapons that were just about to bomb Amman with it, Amman, his capital, to try and take out anybody who's around, especially the leadership, including him, King Abdullah. So he screamed from and the press hardly said a thing about it. It's amazing that they would do this, except if there's another issue here. Then we have a look at Egypt, where they got rid of President Barak, and guess what? I mean, President was probably not a good man. Maybe he wasn't, but I'll tell you something. He stopped the war between Israel happening and Egypt happening for over 20 years. He didn't allow the Coptic church to be persecuted by every Muslim madhead that's around. There were not Christian Coptic girls being abducted and raped. There weren't people being hung like on crosses outside the presidential palace because they were in opposition to him. There was, they might have gone to prison. I don't know. But what's happening there now makes Barak look, like a Sunday school picnic by comparison. I mean, you fancy living there. Then you got Syrian President Assad. He's trying to defend his situation, which is like hell on earth for what he's doing. But are we going to shoehorn some more Muslim Brotherhood in? Now we've got it in Egypt. We've now got it in Libya, and they've also got it in, and they're trying to get it in Ethiopia now, because as soon as he got into power, they funded and armed the Muslims who are living peacefully with their Christian brothers next door to them, and they suddenly turned on them, and tens of thousands of Ethiopian Christians had to flee for their lives. Their homes were burned, their churches were burned, and the Bibles were burned. And this goes on all the time. Where you try to burn one Quran, which I think is stupid in any event, but they try to burn one Quran, and you get another lot of more people killed because of the mindless riots that go on. And then, of course, I've already mentioned about the Syrian chemical and biological weapons, which they were not in the process of manufacturing, but they now have in great volumes. Now we've got appeasement is the harbinger of disaster. We are appeasing Iran. I mean, what are we waiting for there? I can't imagine, because we've got so many examples of where you wait. Go back to Hitler. We waited for Hitler, and we signed little agreements with him, and peace in our time and all that sort of thing. Meanwhile, I was growing the greatest sort of military army in history, along with aircraft, Luftwaffe, and his navy had some of the most horrifically powerful battleships. The British didn't have one that could match them. And because we stood back all the time, we ended up in the biggest war in history, covering the whole planet. Where, as the German general said, if we just moved on one particular issue when they walked into the French sector, they would have deposed him, because he would have failed. But no, we let them have it, and then of course he just went on from strength to strength until we really had a problem, and it involved millions dying. We're doing the same thing with Iran. They've had time to take all their centrifuges, put them in hardened shelter under a mountain of rock, etc. It just goes on and on and on, and now we're facing up to the ability of them to cede the Straits of Oman, of Hormuz, and now through Yemen they're taking over the Gate of Tears, and they're attacking Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni, and it just goes on and on and on. Right now we're facing up to a major problem because we didn't move in the beginning. We're just sitting on our hands with the most powerful armies, navies and air forces in history. This appeasement by Obama is crazy. Just because you don't want to face up to it now, it doesn't mean to say that you're not going to have to face up to it shortly. I mean, they've made that, Hitler said he was going to kill the Jews, he was going to do something about the Jews, etc. And, he did. And as Netanyahu said, he said, when these people say it, I believe it. And he said, furthermore, we're going to do something about it. I wish he would. But, we have pieces of paper called agreements. We saw, the Prime Minister come back with it from Hitler and shook it in the air, peace in our time. He blew away in his hand. I think it was so windy, but it was, anyway. This is the thing that was going to save so many people's lives. Peace in our time, a piece of paper. As far as I know, such agreements between nations have been around for eons. Peace agreements down the ages. There's nothing wrong with having good intentions. I absolutely agree. However, the course of human history, going back to the pharaohs and even the Hittites, who came to a peace agreement, none of which ever worked. They mostly were innovative in producing intervals during which the belligerent nation readied itself for another attack, having learnt of the other's weakness or found a new military advantage. But there was always another war, and then another war. And we've seen this time and again in Europe. In 1867, I think it was, you had the Railway War where the Germans attacked the French. And then in 1914-18, you had the same thing, the Germans attacked Europe. And then in 1939-45, you had the Germans attack again. That was 3 goes, So, you can always expect something from that quarter. There we are. Paper burns. It does. It's very easy to burn. And so agreements failed down the ages, and equivalent of burnt, many people burnt buildings. If you don't believe that, just go and have a look at Rome. Let's go and have a look at Persepolis. Go and have a look at Babylon. Go and have a look at Nineveh. Those are results of agreements that failed. And it goes right the way down history. There's never, ever been a change. How many times was Athens burnt down? I know it was burnt down by the Persians, So, then it was burnt down by the Spartans. All these were part of agreements, All the time we had these people with good intentions resulting in a massive war. All that seemed to happen was you built up this huge tension which resulted in war and lots of people dying. To prevent war, the only way to prevent war is to be prepared for war in this age. I'm talking about the age of man's rule. I remember under Carter, the West was in a desperate situation. I lived through that. We used to say America went from a Lincoln down to a Ford and then into a cart. And they got Carter. I mean, what an idiot that guy was. President Reagan said he was going to rearm straight after they got rid of Carter. And he did. Russia, seeing a determination in Washington that hadn't been there under Carter, stood back and stopped attacking. And slowly this whole thing went backwards until we saw the Soviet Union collapse. But that took Reagan to stand up to them and say, we're no longer going to put up with this, guys. We're going to rearm before you take us over. Carter the appeaser and hand-wringer. It worries me that we see the same trend as we witnessed under Carter, where the West disarmed us. Now President Obama signaled during a discussion, caught unexpectedly on an open microphone, that they thought was switched off. And he was sort of saying, oh, well, I can be more flexible. After the war, we can reduce all the warheads. For goodness sake, everybody else is arming. I mean, China, which is Russia's great ally, is arming. They're pumping out battleships and aircraft carriers like most people, have sandwiches. It is happening. Under Carter, South America, Africa, Asia was in flames as one country after another fell to the front for the liberation of Palestine, the front for the liberation of Eritrea, the front for this, the front for that, and they're all communist fronts. These were communist fronts because of Carter's weakness. They flourished as it happened in the Muslim world now. Carter was a disaster. Obama is. He's done exactly the same thing. We've got, the Muslim Brotherhood in all these countries uniting under one banner, and this is all prophesied. We're heading for the greatest war in history. Today, we are once again seeing America and Britain lose pride in their power as we witnessed under Carter. Britain is just almost disarmed. We've got a prime minister who's trying to save so much money. He's doing an excellent job of that, but he's left the country just about defenseless. Well, we've got some new submarines being launched, but these aircraft carriers are very doubtful. And since when did Britain launch battleships without guns? Because that's exactly what's happening here. They're going to launch these 2 aircraft carriers, which were signed up by Gordon Brown, and these 2 aircraft carriers will not have any aircraft on them. I mean, you've got to believe that this is a crazy situation. Why didn't at least keep some of the planes that could have flown off them? But worse appeasement is shoehorning us into the greatest war in history. I mean, that's what's happening. That's why they don't feel any threat from Obama. The way he's been talking, as far as I'm concerned, he sort of said we won't do anything. And unfortunately, Romney seems to be matching him, trying to beat him, saying, no, we can't use any of this power. And so we've lost the pride of our power. I've been watching current events for 59 years. I'm 70 now, so I was about the age of 11. But I was part of a family that did watch it, and we discussed it, and all our friends were into it, because those days you didn't have television, so you used to discuss these things. Since I was brought home, I was aware of the international affairs because my parents were. It was normal for me to know all the presidents and prime ministers of the different countries, the capitals, cities, longest rivers, highest mountains, and so that was between the age of 10 and 11, and so it's gone on until now. In search for answers at the age of 21, I was introduced to the greatest advanced information telling me exactly what was going to happen, like reading a newspaper, but in advance. The fact people don't know or have heard there are rivers under the sea doesn't change the fact they are there. There are rivers under the sea, and we have known that for over 3,000 years. Yet, we only found them in 1960. So you say, well, if it was there, we knew the information, it was written in a book for us to read, in 2 books actually, why didn't we know? Why did it take us 1960? Why was it 3,000 years later we only discovered it? And who was it discovered by? Because a lot of people say that. Oh, well, who was it? Well, it was 1960, Jacques Cousteau in the Bath Escape Trieste went to the bottom of the Atlantic, came back and said, there's a river down there that makes the Amazon look like a trickle, and the Amazon is the biggest river on the planet. So that gives you some fact. So how did the Bible know that there were rivers at the bottom of the ocean if we only found that in 1960? The fact that most people have never read this information and rely on others' hostile and yes, ignorant comments does not change the fact that today we are seeing exactly what was prophesied to happen in the word of the Heavenly Father Yahweh. If you read Psalm 83, which I really do urge you to do, and you can know all those names there are known today, and then finish the Hagarites and the Syrians, and you can easily see what the Philistinians are, and you can easily see Amalek, and all these nations are literally named today, Ammon, and all these things. We know who they are. But, Psalm 83, Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation, Matthew 24, Mark 21, and it will be seen all there. All the prophecies. But when I say I'm not limiting that book, because Joshua tells you exactly what's going to happen right back into the book of Genesis. All these books, if you go to Obadiah, it tells you what's going on. Very interesting book, Obadiah, because it takes you from the crisis that's going to happen through the end of that crisis and into the new age, the new administration that will replace this present satanic administration, which is revealed in Job, and of course when Yeshua was in the desert and then he was taken to the top of the mountain. There he recognized Satan's power in this age. And he didn't say to him, you don't have that power to give me all those nations to rule over. He said, stop tempting me. All prophecies about this time. Once you take time to understand and study these scriptures, you will understand this is the time that more is written about than any other age in the Bible. Books like Daniel, Revelation, Enoch, 2 Ezra, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and many others were dictated by Yahweh to all these men who were scribes who wrote what they were told to write down. And when John was writing Revelation, if you read the very first verse of Revelation, I'll just read it to you, which I'm just paging through to get there. I was going to read it. Here it says, the revelation of Yeshua, Messiah, which Yahweh gave him to show his servants the things must come to pass. And he sent and signified it through his angel to his servant John. Now, there you had the authorization and seal of approval to the words in that revelation by the Heavenly Father, Yahweh. That's his name, not God. God is not a name, it's a title. It's like Mr., Mrs., Lord, etc. These are not names, they're titles. His name is Yahweh. We know that. I mean, there's so many books now. If you go on the internet and Google Yahweh, you'll see where 10 years ago there was virtually nothing. Today, I think there's nearly 9 or 10 million pages on it. That's how it's expanded. It's gone from nothing. As a matter of fact, I wrote a book recently, 3 months ago, and I was looking up to find out how many pages were there. It was 7.4 million. And it had gone from 7.4 million to nearly 10 million in that 3-month period. That shows you how this name is now being recognized as the true name. And so then Yahweh gave it to his son Yeshua, who was called Jesus by everybody. There was no J in the English language in the 1700s. Everybody knows that, who's done any study of the English language and history. So it wasn't Jesus, it was Yeshua. His name was Yeshua. And then it was handed to the angel after he'd authorized what was said in there. And the angel's job was to go down and then dictate it to John, whose only job was like a scribe. Now, when I was in underwriting many years ago, when I was very young, I'd write sometimes 40, 50 letters a day. And I'd dictate them to a shorthand typist who would take it down and then go and type the letter I'd give her. Then she brought it back to me, and I had to check to see what I had said and whether she got it all right. If there was a mistake, I had to give it back to her. And if there was too many mistakes from these typists, I mean, because if we hired new typists, you get a new typist. And one woman I remember was absolutely helpless. We found she was on drugs. We had to get rid of her. And we had to get another one who could read her notes and get on, because it meant that I had to sometimes reread the thing and check what I'd said 2 or 3 or 4 times. John was obviously a reliable scribe. He took it down as he did. He didn't have a bad day. He didn't misinterpret anything. That wasn't his job. His only job was to take it down. Ezra said the same thing. And if you look through most of these people, they had no authority to do anything else but take it down. These were not dreamings of men. That is why you've got 66 to 70 books that have got the same story and they'd never met each other. But quite often they didn't even read the books because there wasn't books around in those days. But I'll tell you something, that the whole story of the Bible is also in the stars. Very simple. I can prove it. I can show you all the stars. But this isn't the subject of this particular article. So their job as scribes or prophets was just to write it down. That was it. There's more amazing books than referred to in the Bible with unique knowledge. And I'm talking about unique knowledge. There were 47 men who wrote 70 books as far as I'm concerned. they all tell the same story, the same thing right the way through. They tell it different ways, but it's the same story. To give you an example, when Yeshua was crucified, he was given the cross or the stake, and he dragged it up on his back to Calvary, where they hung him on the stake. Now, whether it was a cross or not, I doubt it. I don't think the Romans would go to anything to that extent. But if you go to the book of Exodus, there you've got Abraham taking his son Isaac, and they went to the bottom of the hill. They left all the servants there, which represented the disciples, and then they went up the hill together. His son carried the wood, and he carried other stuff. And when they got to the top of the hill, he was put on the altar. And then Abraham was to raise the knife in judgment to kill his son, when the voice of Yahweh said, you've been tested, and that's fine. There is forgiveness. That was the ram in the bushes, and he was taken off the altar, and the ram was put on it. So that was forgiveness, and that is the same sort of story, just told in a different way, and people just don't even understand that. Why do I say there are more than 66 books? Because having studied these books without dogma, which is a big problem in churches, one sees unique knowledge that would come from nowhere else except Yahweh. Like, as I say, rivers under the sea. But there's also smokers under the sea. And they call them smokers. Why? Because they take poison before they call them fountains of the deep. Why? Because the Bible calls them fountains of the deep. So they call them smokers. They are fountains. You can see if you go into any of the major squares like Piccadilly Circus or whatever, you've got fountains there. They squirt water out, and the water comes back down the fountain. This is what these things do. It squirts water out under pressure, hot water, admittedly. Then you've got black holes. That was in the Book of Enoch. I didn't even know what a black hole looked like till I read the Book of Enoch, and I thought, oh, that's what a black hole. I went and investigated, and that's what a black hole looked like. How did the Book of Enoch, was written 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, know that was a black hole? Because Yahweh revealed it. How did the Book of Ezra know how tsunamis occur? The bottom of the ocean's tearing up and causing these huge waves. We only found that about 15, 20 years ago. I remember, scientists on an island saying, "Where did all the people go?" And then one scientist said, "You see that tree there? It seems to have lost all its branches, and to that height there must have been a wave come through here." That was just another example, and they started to find out from then that the bottom of the ocean had been torn up, and then these massive earthquakes, And then, of course, you've got Max Planck, who discovered the theory of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and that's in the Bible. And then you've got the time-space continuum, and I'll read it to you. In the beginning, that is time, Yahweh created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. That's in the very first verse of the Bible. And it took us hundreds of years, top men, thinkers, to discover that and call it the time-space continuum. It goes on and on and on. The hydrological cycle, how to measure wind and how to measure fire. All in the Bible, back in Ezra 2. And only found that out 200 years ago. What about... it just goes on. I can give you so many examples, Quarantine, for instance. Why did so many people down the centuries have to die? When quarantine was mentioned way back. Nations of prophecy. In the Middle East situation mentioned. Yes, is it mentioned? Yes. Are Germany, the EU, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Persia, Iran, Iraq, which is Media, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Ethiopia mentioned? Yes. Are Britain and America mentioned? Yes. And the disaster we're just about to face. See a book that starts out trying to introduce you to the Heavenly Father on Kindle Amazon. It says, "Help me find God." Go onto Amazon and find that book and buy it. It's cheap enough. Now the nations, weather, earthquakes, droughts, famines, economic collapse are all mentioned there. My job has been made clear. I'm only here to warn you. I'm not here to start churches or anything like that. Many people say, "Why did you start a church?" There's no time. There's absolutely no time to start churches. Time is very short, and if you knew of the developments, you would understand why. The entertainment press, like the Telegraph, Times, Express, I'm not just picking on the Telegraph or Times, it's all of them. They're full of celebrities, footballers, cricketers, etc. Yet we are sliding into a massive war, and few people even know about it. It has already started. For instance, a Turkish plane was shot down, fighter, it was an observer. They got the people, the two pilots out the water, and apparently the Syrians killed them. And then all the people of Syria, to get away from the war, a lot of them have fled across the border into Turkey, which upsets Turkey because now they've got all these people there they don't want. And then Syria somehow started to fire on them, and they hit one of the Turkish towns. So the Turks moved up their army up to the Syrian border. They started to fire back. Now they've fired in. So far they've created a 10-kilometer enclave there, which has upset the Turks, the Syrians, because they've started to fire back, and there's aircraft on each side. And guess what? That's exactly where the Bible says those nations around the river Euphrates, this war is going to start. And that's where it is. That's where it's starting right now. You see, Turkey wants the influence that Iran's got in Syria, and Iran doesn't want to lose Syria. So they've moved the Al-Quds brigades in, which are designed specifically to take Jerusalem, and also the Republican Guard, thousands and thousands coming in on commercial flights. And this, of course, upsets Turkey, because Turkey wants to see the end of Assad. Assad is a Shiite, and his army is Shiite, which is 10% of the population. 90% of the population, therefore, is being held down by Assad and his Shiite warriors. And Iran wants to keep him in power. And, of course, now you've got Hezbollah wants to keep him in power, because that's how they get through to Iran and get all this stuff. So we are seeing a major problem here, and it's developing. So we are sliding into a massive war. It has already started. Guns are firing. Tens of thousands are dying. Revolution and murder of Christians in Egypt and Muslim countries are commonplace. And the West and its media say nothing. Neither these two presidential candidates, I might point out. Ethiopia. People are literally being crucified. Once the Muslim Brotherhood came to power in Egypt, they armed the Islamists in Ethiopia. And they crucified men who were in opposition to the Morsi and the new government on trees naked. That's what they did. None of this is said. They say, well, Morsi's got in a bit of a problem, but not too much of a problem. It's a major problem. They've got tanks on the Israeli border. That's the first time that's happened in 20 years. So Israel looks at the north and he sees Syria with weapons of mass destruction, the chemical, biological weapons. She sees down south the Egyptians on her border. We've got Hamas on the eastern side there, on the Mediterranean, who are slamming in 55 rockets some days into the nation. And you've got Hezbollah, who's got 60,000 rockets up there. 60,000! But recent news, good news, the best news I've seen in ages, they've taken some of those rockets now and faced them up to Turkey. That's how bad they fear the Turkey now, because they don't want to see Assad fall, because Hezbollah will then be cut off from its main supplier, Iran. So hundreds of thousands of Christians fled in Ethiopia, western Ethiopia, because the Muslims or the Islamists turned on them, because they've been armed by the Egyptians by the looks of things, and they've fled or murdered. Their Bibles and their churches burned. Nothing is said. The president candidates know this, or yet they say nothing. America is like this massive giant, armed to the teeth, yet seems to have no idea how to use its might. When Islamists blow up a shop, we should warn them. If they then do it again, find out where their families are and turn those areas into a hole in the ground. Otherwise, continued attacks on Israel will provoke a response. That will eventually lead to World War III. They will not allow another Holocaust. Now, I think that's right. I mean, if it was your family and yourself who are on the line with rockets buzzing into you every day, you'd have to be some sort of weird person if you didn't feel that you wanted revenge on these people. If you were having people injured and you had these things going all the time, you would want something done about it. I would want something done about it. You'd have to be completely weird not to want something done about it. And that's exactly, because they're not going to allow that. They have what they call the Samson option, or the Masada option. The Samson option is the main thing, is a strategy. And if you know the story of Samson, Samson was eventually captured because his hair was shorn by the Philistines, because he had the Nazirite vow. He had this massive power, but provided he didn't have his hair cut, Delilah cut his hair. He ended up in a prison where he was tied to a grinding wheel. He had to do this. They forgot about his hair. About 2 years later, of course, the hair had all grown back again, or 3 years later, whatever it was, and they were taking him to their big temple, to Marduk, to persecute him and probably kill him. And when he got there, he asked one of his sisters, maybe Delilah, to take him to the pillars, and they took him to the pillars, and of course he brought the whole temple down and killed everybody. That's the pillars of civilization that we're talking about here.